Kaliningrad was never just another Russian city. It was a forward base, a heavily armed outpost buried deep inside NATO territory. For years, it stood like a loaded weapon pointed at Europe, packed with missiles, warships, and over 1 million civilians living in its shadow. But now, something has changed. Quietly, methodically, almost invisibly. The routes keeping Kaliningrad alive are disappearing one by one. Borders are tightening. Rail lines are being choked. Energy lifelines are being severed. And behind it all, a coordinated pressure campaign is unfolding across land, sea, and infrastructure. This isn't a sudden attack. It's something far more calculated, a slow isolation, engineered over years. And now, the question is no longer if Kaliningrad can be cut off, but how long it can survive like this. For decades, Kaliningrad was Russia's strategic trump card in Europe, a heavily militarized enclave on the Baltic Sea, separated from mainland Russia but positioned dangerously close to NATO's core. Inside this narrow strip of land sat advanced radar systems, air defense networks, the Baltic Fleet, and nuclear-capable Iskander missile systems. But beneath that show of strength was a critical weakness. Kaliningrad depended almost entirely on supply routes crossing NATO territory, roads through Poland, railways through Lithuania, energy systems tied to a shared Soviet-era grid. Without them, the region couldn't function economically or militarily. For years, that vulnerability was tolerated. Then came 2022. Russia's invasion of Ukraine changed the rules overnight. What had once been a fragile balance turned into strategic pressure, and NATO's eastern members began testing just how far that pressure could go. Poland moved first. At first, the changes were subtle. Border checks tightened, visa access narrowed, commercial traffic slowed. But this wasn't random bureaucracy. It was controlled friction. Each delay, each restriction added weight to Kaliningrad's already fragile logistics. But that was only the beginning. By late 2025, Poland escalated dramatically. Russian consulates across the country were shut down one by one. These weren't just diplomatic buildings, they were intelligence hubs. From Gdansk to Poznan, these sites had monitored NATO movements, tracked military shipments, and intercepted communications across the Baltic region. With their closure, Kaliningrad lost something critical: visibility. A military force without intelligence is operating blind, and Poland didn't stop there. In parallel, construction began on something far more permanent: a physical barrier designed to reshape the border itself, the Eastern Shield. Announced in 2024, it quickly became one of Europe's largest fortification efforts since World War II. By early 2026, construction had accelerated. Anti-tank trenches carved into the earth, layers of concrete barriers, known as dragon's teeth, stretching across kilometers, hidden bunkers, mine deployment systems, surveillance infrastructure. This wasn't symbolic, it was operational, and it came with NATO backing, German engineering units deployed to assist construction. At the same time, Germany began stationing thousands of troops and modern Leopard 2 tanks in Lithuania, a historic shift in European military posture. Kaliningrad was being surrounded. Then came the economic choke points. In January 2026, Poland shut down key border crossings entirely. What remained open was barely functional. Civilian crossings slowed to a crawl, sometimes just a handful of vehicles per hour. Waiting times stretched into half a day or more, but the real damage hit commercial transport. Insurance companies began classifying routes into Kaliningrad as high risk. Without insurance, trucks couldn't operate. Supply chains collapsed almost overnight. Thousands of drivers lost their jobs. Logistics companies folded. And for ordinary people, the effects were immediate. Cities just 100 kilometers away became unreachable. Trade evaporated. Prices rose. Entire industries stalled. And this is where the situation became dangerous. Because while Poland was sealing the southern route, another pressure point was tightening in the east. Kaliningrad's most critical artery didn't run through Poland. It ran through Lithuania. For decades, a single railway line connected the enclave to mainland Russia. Through it flowed everything: fuel, construction materials, industrial goods, food supplies. Without that line, Kaliningrad doesn't just weaken, it suffocates. And Lithuania knew it. The first signals came in 2022 when Vilnius restricted the transit of sanctioned goods, steel, cement, industrial materials. At the time, it was framed as compliance with EU sanctions. But military analysts saw something else. A test. Russia responded with warnings, harsh rhetoric, promises of consequences. But nothing followed. No escalation, no retaliation. And that silence revealed something critical. The bluff had been called. What happened next changed everything. Restrictions expanded gradually. More goods were blocked. More shipments turned back. Each step tightened the pressure without triggering direct conflict. Then came 2025, a seemingly unrelated crisis. Smuggling operations using airborne contraband triggered a national security response inside Lithuania. Borders tightened, enforcement increased, but beneath that reaction was an opportunity. And Lithuania took it. Transit permissions for Russian petroleum products, the lifeblood of Kaliningrad's civilian and military systems, were phased out. Within weeks, they stopped completely. The impact was immediate. Hundreds of thousands of tons of fuel gone. And this wasn't just about cars or heating. This fuel-powered military vehicles, naval operations, mobile missile systems. Without it, mobility disappears. And stationary military assets are vulnerable assets. But the Pentagon had already anticipated this kind of pressure scenario. Kaliningrad's entire defensive doctrine relies on rapid movement, missile launchers repositioning, air defenses shifting, naval units deploying quickly, remove fuel, and you remove flexibility. And Lithuania wasn't finished. Discussions began about something even more drastic, changing the rail infrastructure itself, moving from Soviet-era track systems to European standards, a technical shift with massive strategic consequences. Because if that happens, Russian trains physically cannot enter Kaliningrad. No diplomacy required, just steel and spacing. And then came the most fragile system of all, energy. For decades, Kaliningrad operated as part of a synchronized grid linking multiple countries. That system kept voltage stable, supply consistent, and costs manageable. But as the Baltic states disconnected and integrated with Europe's grid, Kaliningrad was left behind. An energy island. Russia attempted to compensate. LNG shipments, floating terminals, local generation. But experts quickly identified the risks: instability, high costs, weather dependency. A single failure in an isolated grid can trigger total blackout. Hospitals, water systems, military infrastructure. Everything goes dark at once, and harsh Baltic winters only make it worse. What analysts noticed next was alarming. Every major supply category, transport, fuel, energy, was now under pressure simultaneously. Not collapsed, but strained. And that kind of pressure doesn't need to break a system instantly. It just needs to keep tightening. Now, step back and look at the full picture. Kaliningrad once had 3 reliable lifelines: road, rail, and energy. Today, all 3 are compromised. Road access through Poland is heavily restricted and physically fortified. Rail transit through Lithuania is reduced, unstable, and potentially facing structural shutdown. And the shared energy grid is gone. What remains is the sea. But even that option comes with serious limits. Shipping cargo across the Baltic is significantly more expensive than land transport. Ports struggle with capacity. Ferries can't match the volume of rail networks, and delays stretch into weeks. But cost isn't the biggest problem. Control is. With Finland and Sweden now part of NATO, the Baltic Sea has effectively become a monitored zone. Surveillance is constant. Naval presence is heavy. Every movement is tracked. And in modern warfare, visibility is vulnerability. Russian supply ships operating in these waters are no longer moving freely. They are being watched, every mile, every hour. And then came the moment nobody expected. Western military leaders began speaking openly about Kaliningrad's vulnerability, not hypothetically, operationally. Statements suggested that in a conflict scenario, the enclave could be neutralized rapidly using coordinated land, air, and naval operations, precision strikes, electronic warfare, air superiority. This wasn't just rhetoric, it reflected a shift in confidence. Because while Russia's position weakens logistically, NATO's presence in the region is growing stronger. Troops, armor, air assets, infrastructure, all expanding. At the same time, Russia faces another constraint: Ukraine. The war continues to drain manpower, equipment, and resources. Reinforcements are limited. Losses are ongoing. Opening a second major front is not just risky, it may be impossible, which raises a critical question. How do you defend a forward military outpost when reinforcing it becomes harder every month? Kaliningrad still holds strategic value. Its missile systems can reach major European capitals. Its naval base provides access to the Baltic. Its symbolism runs deep in Russian history. But strategy isn't just about positioning, it's about sustainability. And sustaining Kaliningrad is becoming more expensive, more complex, and more uncertain. Kaliningrad was designed to project power, to pressure Europe, to anchor Russia's presence in the Baltic, to serve as a constant reminder of military reach. But today, that same outpost is under pressure from every direction, not through direct conflict, but through controlled isolation. Supply lines are tightening, costs are rising, options are shrinking. And while the enclave still stands, the balance around it is shifting. So now the question isn't just about Kaliningrad, it's about what happens next. Does this pressure remain contained, or does it trigger a wider escalation? Because when a strategic position becomes a strategic liability, history shows that something eventually gives. And this time, the consequences could reach far beyond the Baltic.